Om Namah Shri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukhaswarupaya Swami Tapaharini. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to part 4 of our 5-part series of classes on an extraordinary text, an essay written by Swami Vivekananda, originally in Bengali, and which has been translated many times, and I have taken a stab at it myself and given a new translation, which is in your hands now. And in the previous 3 classes, we covered up to paragraph number 14, up to 14. What we'll do in the remaining 2 classes is discuss 15 through 30. But I think it'll help for us to get a sense of the entire arc of the rest of this essay. So I suggest that we read all the way to the end, 15 to 30, and then we'll start discussing. Okay. 15. However, in the course of time, the descendants of the Aryans who had deviated from right conduct were devoid of dispassion, feeble in intellect, and devoted only to the prevailing popular customs, were not able to understand the deeper import of the Puranas and other scriptures, which seemed to contradict one another, due to the fact that they taught different aspects of God and preached the subtle truths of Vedanta in gross and multifarious language for those of little intelligence. Consequently, when they turned India, the land of religion, almost into a hell, by splitting into numerous divisions the indivisible eternal religion, which encompasses infinite spiritual attitudes. The language is very important. Ananta bhav shamushti akhanda Sanatana Dharma. Thereby kindling the fire of sectarian jealousy and anger, and attempting constantly to throw each other into that fire. This is one sentence that keeps going to the next paragraph. That's why there's the M dash. Let's continue. 16. Then it was that Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna incarnated himself in order to show what the true religion of the Aryans was, and where, amidst all its innumerable sects and denominations that had cropped up throughout the country over a vast period of time, lay the true unity of the Hindu Dharma, which had been devastated by continuous sectarian quarrels, which appeared to be divided in various ways, and the various sects of which were constantly quarreling with one another, and abounding in customs divergent in every way. And above all, he incarnated to hold up before people, for their lasting welfare, his own life as a living embodiment of the universal, timeless, and global essence of the Sanatana Dharma, so long cast into oblivion by the process of time. 17. The shastra, which is eternally existent, and the instrument of the divine creator, preserver, and destroyer of the universe, reveals itself spontaneously in the hearts of rishis, purified of past impressions. In order to demonstrate this, and because such verification of the shastra will help in the revival, reestablishment, and spread of religion, God, who is the very embodiment of the Veda, has in this new incarnation almost completely neglected external forms of learning. 18. It is well established in the Smritis, etc., that God incarnates again and again in human form in order to protect the Veda, or true religion, and Brahmanhood. That is, the ability to teach true religion. 19. The waters of a river falling down a precipice acquire greater velocity. The rising wave after a hollow swells higher. So, after every period of decline, the Aryan society, under the compassionate guidance of the divine, has risen the more glorious and powerful, Such is the testimony of history. 20. Rising again after each fall, our revived society expresses more of the eternal perfection hidden within. And likewise, the Lord, the inner controller of all beings, manifests himself more and more in each successive incarnation. 21. Again and again, Bharat, meaning India, has fallen into a swoon. And again, Bharat's Lord revived Bharat by manifesting himself. 22. But never before has the pall of darkness, now almost over, enveloped this holy land of ours like a pitch-black night of sorrow, with such a dense darkness as at present. Compared with the depth of this fall, all previous falls are like mere hoof marks. 23. Therefore, compared with the splendor of this new awakening of Bharat, all previous awakenings will pale like stars before the rising sun. And compared with the great power and impact of this reawakening, the power and impact of all previous revivals will appear as child's play. 24. During this present state of decline, all of the various spiritual attitudes, Bhabshamashti, embodied in the eternal religion, have been lying scattered here and there for want of a truly competent person to realize and reconcile all of them. Some of these spiritual attitudes have been preserved in the form of various small sects, while others have been lost completely. 25. But strong in the strength of this new spiritual renaissance, people, after piecing together the fragmented and scattered mass of spiritual knowledge, will be able to understand and practice all the various spiritual attitudes, and to rediscover those that were lost. And as the sure pledge of this glorious future, the supremely compassionate Lord has incarnated far more fully in this present age than he ever did in all past ages, mastering the entire gamut of spiritual attitudes and promoting every form of spiritual knowledge. 26. Therefore, at the very dawn of this momentous age, the harmonization of all spiritual attitudes, Sharbobhavir Shamonnoy, is being taught. And this limitless, infinite bhava, which was present but so long concealed in the eternal scripture and the eternal religion, is now being rediscovered and declared to humanity in a trumpet voice. 27. This new religion of the age is the source of all blessings to the world, and especially to India. And Sri Ramakrishna, the founder of this new religion, is the reformed and perfected manifestation of all the holy founders of past religions. O people, have faith in this and take it to heart. 28. The dead never return. The past night does not reappear. An emotional upheaval, once it has subsided, never reappears in the same form again. The individual soul does not assume the same body twice. O people, we invite you to worship the living instead of the dead. We invite you to struggle in the present rather than brood regretfully over the past. We invite you to tread the wide new highway lying close at hand, instead of needlessly wasting energy in retracing lost pathways. O wise ones, try to understand what we mean. 29. Imagine the complete manifestation of that power, the very first appearance of which has roused distant echoes from all across the world, and giving up all useless doubt, weakness, jealousy, and malice common among enslaved people. Come and help in the turning of this mighty wheel of the new age. 30. We are the servants of Sri Ramakrishna, his children, his playmates, assisting him in his divine play. Make firm this belief and enter the field of action. I should mention that this was written on the occasion of Sri Ramakrishna's birthday in 1901, which is why it's strongly focused on Sri Ramakrishna's unique contribution to the age. What makes him so special, so unique? So let's go back to 15. So 15 and 16 have to be taken together, these two giant paragraphs, which form almost just one sentence. This is where he introduces Sri Ramakrishna for the first time. So this is momentous. And for those of you who are joining for the first time, I suggest that you go back to the previous 3 classes, or at least read starting from 1, because you'll see that even though the part that we read is very sort of emotionally uplifting and inspiring, it starts in a way that it's very kind of theoretical. He's defining science versus Vedas, what is shastra. Some parts of it might even feel dry and technical. But you have to appreciate the whole development, the whole narrative arc from paragraph 1 to paragraph 30 to appreciate the genius of Swami Vivekananda and what he's doing in a single short essay. It's really remarkable. He's really explaining the entirety of Hinduism, because the title of the essay is, What is Hindu Dharma? And explaining Sri Ramakrishna's unique role in revivifying and really highlighting the spiritual core of Hinduism. One thing I wanted to mention, a couple weeks ago I was on the East Coast. Oh, no, this is a separate story, sorry. So I'm a Hindu chaplain at UCLA and USC, and I was discussing with one of the students at UCLA the title of my next talk there, or discussion. And they suggested, well, maybe you can explain the fundamental principles of Hinduism. I said, yeah, that sounds good. So what do we want to call it? What is Hinduism? And suddenly I hear kind of silence on the phone. And he says, how about what is Sanatana Dharma? And I thought to myself, well, that's fine, but in the past, in our discussions, I found there are a lot of non-Indians, and I don't know if non-Indians are going to understand this big Sanskrit term, whereas everyone knows what Hinduism is. At least they've heard of the term. But anyway, I said, you guys figure it out. So he consulted with the others, and they decided, what is Sanatana Dharma? I say this because it's like Hinduism has become a 4-letter word. It's become a kind of bad word. And it's very saddening to me that that's the case. But it's true. And maybe I will mention the East Coast incident. I was guest teaching at Boston College a couple of weeks ago. And I was sitting on the side of the room when the professor started to give an intro to Hinduism. And right off the bat, she begins by saying, Hinduism is based on the caste system. And it's a hereditary caste system, and it's responsible for all sorts of atrocity. So, see, that's why what's happening is even the new generation of young Hindu children growing up in the West, not so much in India, but more in the West, they feel ashamed or embarrassed to admit that they're Hindus. Because of the media and other things, Hinduism has become equated with Hinduism equals caste system equals evil. And this is a great shame. And so I think this essay, written in 1901, over 100 years ago, is a great antidote for us to understand what Hinduism really means. And one thing I want to point out, Swami Vivekananda, he used the term Sanatana Dharma in several places here, but he doesn't shy away from the term Hinduism. And I think that's significant. And I think we should not be just, going with the flow, and just because Hinduism has taken on some bad connotations because of people criticizing it, that we should drop the term, that we should replace it with something else. Why should we? Swami Vivekananda, in asking what is Hindu Dharma, he ends up saying the Hindu Dharma is Sanatana Dharma. It's the eternal religion, which encompasses all the different spiritual attitudes found in all the different world religions. And it was Sri Ramakrishna who lived and expressed in his own life that harmonizing of all the different spiritual attitudes contained in the eternal religion that is Hinduism. That's the true Hinduism. Okay, so that's one thing I wanted to mention. In what sense is Hinduism the Sanatana Dharma, the eternal religion? Sanatana means eternal, Dharma means religion. So in what sense eternal? Because it's universal and timeless. That's the basic idea. And if you ask for what is Swami Vivekananda thinking of, scripturally speaking, in the Vedas, one of his favorite mantras is from the Rig Veda, Ekam Sad Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. The truth is one, but sages call it by various names. This is a core principle of Hinduism, which makes it the Sanatana Dharma. The beauty of this, there are all sorts of debates about, is Hinduism polytheistic? Is it monotheistic? Is it something other than either of these things? If we just have a better understanding, a more nuanced understanding of what Hinduism means as Sanatana Dharma, we won't be confused about how to answer this question. Polytheism means that there are two or more gods who are equally powerful and equally great. Hinduism never teaches that. So we can definitely rule out polytheism as an interpretation of Hinduism. Hinduism is not polytheistic. Then the question is, then what is it? The opposite of polytheism is monotheism. All the Abrahamic religions, monotheistic. Judaism, Christianity, Islam. Christianity is complicated by the fact that it has this Holy Trinity. God the Father, Christ the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And Islam will criticize Christianity for that reason and say that even though you pretend to be monotheistic, you believe in three different deities. Anyway, we're not going into that. But my suggestion is, Hinduism is monotheistic, but it's a special kind of monotheism. Because what you'll find in most of the other forms of monotheism throughout the world is that they say God is one. There's only one supremely powerful God. And that God is X. It's either Allah in the case of Islam, or God the Father, Christ in the case of Christianity, or Krishna in the case of Vaishnavas, or Kali in the case of Shaktas, Ganesha in the case of those who worship Ganesha, and so on and so forth. But what ends up happening often, not always, but often, is that people who believe in a monotheistic religion tend to become a little one-sided or sectarian and say that my God alone is the highest, the truest. Your gods are okay. Sometimes they don't even say that. They'll say that you guys are hopeless and you're going to hell. Somewhat more generous people will say, you guys are okay, but not as great as we are. And you might be able to get salvation, but you're going to be getting salvation through our God without knowing it. So there's a Catholic theologian named Karl Rahner, R-A-H-N-E-R. In the mid-20th century, he came up with this idea of anonymous Christians. And he said that all non-Christians who are still sincere, they can still achieve salvation. They can still reach heaven because, by the grace of Christ, because they are anonymous Christians. They're Christians without knowing it. But because our Christ is so great, he will even save the heathens, if he so wishes. So that's just an example. Anyway, now, Hinduism, the Sanatana Dharma, is monotheistic in a much broader, vaster, and more generous sense than most other monotheistic traditions. There's a term that was popularized by Max Muller, not coined by him. It was coined by Schelling, actually, the German philosopher Schelling. The German Indologist Max Muller popularized the term. The term is henotheism, H-E-N-O-T-H-E-I-S-M. Henotheism is a type of monotheism. It's not that it's a separate category. It's a kind of monotheism. It's a subset of monotheism. What kind of monotheism is it? It's the doctrine that the one supremely powerful God has the capacity to manifest in infinite forms. God can appear as Christ to Christians. God can appear as Allah to Muslims, as Krishna to Vaishnavas, as Ganesha to those who worship Ganesha, as non-dual pure consciousness to those who follow the path of Advaita Vedanta, as Nirvana for the Buddhists, and so on and so forth. And you notice here, in the case of henotheism, there's no higher and lower. There's no idea that my God is higher than yours or greater than yours. All on an equal footing. It's just that the one God appears in various forms, manifests in different forms. And it's a matter of temperament. Which form of God you choose to worship. A matter of your upbringing, temperament, your past samskaras, latent mental tendencies inherited from previous lives. You see. Sri Ramakrishna would give the example of a mother who cooks different preparations of fish for her 5 different children. So her 6-month-old baby has a very weak constitution, weak stomach. So she makes fish soup, something light. For her 12-year-old son, who's a hungry growing boy, she makes fish fry. For another one, it's another kind of fish preparation. He says, likewise, God has created different religions to suit different temperaments in different countries. Notice again, look at the food analogy here. It makes very little sense to say that pasta is objectively better than, tikka masala. It's a matter of temperament, right? That's Hinduism. That's the greatness of Sanatana Dharma. Hinduism has this wonderful concept called the Ishta Devata, the chosen deity. What form of God do I feel naturally drawn toward? That's the question that Hinduism asks you first. This is a wonderful question to ask. Other religions will say, believe in my God. Hinduism will say, what God do you like? What God do you believe in? Okay, let's start from Ganesha, and then we can... You see how it's very different. Bhagavan Krishna says the following in Bhagavad Gita. He says, Ye yatha mam prapadyante tams tathaiva bhajamyaham. As people approach me, so I manifest myself to them. You see the idea here? If I'm a Christian and I love Christ, God will manifest to me as Christ. If I'm a Vaishnava and I love Krishna, that same God will manifest to the Vaishnava as Krishna. You see? This is henotheism. As opposed to more one-sided or sectarian forms of monotheism. So Hinduism is definitely monotheistic, but it's a specific form of monotheism that doesn't go into this language of higher and lower and says that all the different forms of God are equally great, and it's really a matter of temperament, preference, latent mental tendencies. Okay? Now, another thing I want to bring your attention to, look at what he's saying in 15 and 16. The original Sanatana Dharma was a very great thing, and it encompassed all the different spiritual attitudes. But what happened in course of time is that this one vast religion got splintered into many, many different warring sects. People started quarreling with each other, sometimes persecuting other people. Usually not with violence, but still, there was some persecution. And that vastness and that universality and timelessness of the Sanatana Dharma got lost in the course of time. And then that's how paragraph 16 starts. That's when he introduces Sri Ramakrishna. In this context, where India reached its historical nadir, its lowest point, is when God incarnated in his fullest manifestation as Sri Ramakrishna. Because the plunge was so deep that God had to manifest fully in order to pull India from out of its doldrums, out of this state of darkness. And what did Sri Ramakrishna do? In his own life, he expressed the universality of Sanatana Dharma by practicing many different spiritual attitudes, attaining perfection in all of them, and showing that all the different spiritual paths, not just within Hinduism, but even other world religions, including Christianity and Islam, all lead to the same goal of God realization of the same infinite God, the same infinite divine in different forms and aspects. So for him, it was not an intellectual hypothesis, as many philosophers, they come up with hypotheses. He directly experienced God in so many different forms. He practiced many different religious sadhanas in different traditions. And he realized that they all lead to the same goal. And in 15, he uses, that's why I gave the original Bengali here, when he explains the indivisible eternal religion, meaning Sanatana Dharma, which encompasses infinite spiritual attitudes. So the original Bengali is Ananta Bhav Shamushti Akhanda Sanatana Dharma. Bhava, it's a Sanskrit term, which in Bangla becomes bhav. The eternal religion that is Hinduism encompasses all the infinite bhavas. And bhava is a very difficult word to translate. I translate it as spiritual attitudes. It depends on the context. Even in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, the word bhava will come in different contexts. Sometimes people can go into a state of bhava. That's a different meaning of the term bhava. It's related, but it's not the same. Here he's talking about the Sanatana Dharma, the religion itself. Hinduism itself encompasses infinite bhavas. So it's not a person that's being referred to, it's a religion. So that's why it wouldn't make sense to call it a spiritual experience, but it encompasses many different spiritual attitudes or outlooks or perspectives, we can say. Now, something that many of you may not know, Swami Vivekananda refers to Sri Ramakrishna also using the same language of bhava. He calls him Ananta Bhavamai Sri Ramakrishna. Ananta Bhavamayi would be the Sanskrit from which this word is derived. Sri Ramakrishna himself was Ananta Bhavamayi. He encompassed infinite spiritual attitudes, spiritual moods. So in that sense, Sri Ramakrishna himself was a quintessence of Hinduism in all its universality. And I wanted to mention a quotation from Sri Aurobindo, because many people in our tradition are not aware of it. But he points out exactly the same thing. Sri Ramakrishna was the quintessence of Hinduism because it was in his spiritual practices and realizations that he manifested the vastness and universality of Hinduism. So let me read you this quotation. He says, Sri Ramakrishna, and this is not Swami Vivekananda, this is Sri Aurobindo. Okay. Sri Ramakrishna was the last and greatest of all the avatars, incarnations. For while others felt God in a single or limited aspect, he felt God in his illimitable unity as the sum of an illimitable variety. In him, the spiritual experiences of the millions of saints who had gone before were renewed and united. Sri Ramakrishna gave to India the final message of Hinduism to the world. A new era dates from his birth, an era in which the peoples of the earth will be lifted for a while into communion with God, and spirituality become the dominant note of human life. Notice the terms that he's using here, Sri Aurobindo. Even among incarnations, Sri Ramakrishna expressed his own divinity most fully because he felt God in his illimitable unity as a sum of an illimitable variety. He realized God in so many different forms and aspects. And that captures the vastness and universality of the Sanatana Dharma. So it's really Sri Ramakrishna who incarnated this time in order to save Hinduism from these sectarian disputes and the kinds of things that we're seeing now throughout the world, this kind of anti-Hindu sentiment, judging Hinduism by its worst common denominator, by the worst practices that you find within the religion. Do we do that with any other religion? Do we judge Catholicism based on the Crusades or the child sex abuse? No, this is great. Or Islam by terrorists? No. Why should we do that with Hindus? Okay, so that's 15 and 16. Now 17. 17 gets more technical, so I think that we should dwell on this a little bit. So let me reread to you 17. The shastra typically means scripture, but in this text, it has a special meaning. Why? It's because he defines shastra in the very first paragraph. So go to number 1, especially for those of you who are coming for the first time. He defines it directly. The word shastra means the beginningless and endless Veda. But what does Veda mean? This Veda alone is capable of providing religious instruction and guidance. But he defines Veda in 3 and 4. So let me remind you of 3 and 4. Truth is of 2 kinds. First, that which is cognizable by the 5 ordinary senses of man and by inferential reasoning based thereon. Second, that which is cognizable by the subtle, supersensuous power born of yoga. 4, knowledge acquired by the first means is called science, vijnana, bigyan. And knowledge acquired by the second is called Veda. Knowledge acquired through supersensuous perception is what he calls Veda. So not the 4 books known as the Vedas. He brings those in paragraph 10. Okay. And maybe I should just read it. Okay. Although the supersensuous knowledge of truths is present to some extent in our country's itihasas and Puranas, these are the relatively minor scriptures of Hinduism, and in all the religious scriptures of other countries, yet as the first, most complete, and most undistorted collection of the whole body of supersensuous knowledge, the body of words known among the Aryan race as the Vedas, and which is divided into 4 books, deserves to occupy the highest place in all respects, is worthy of being worshipped by the whole world, and is the ultimate proof, Brahmanabhumi, of all religious scriptures, Aryan or foreign. So notice what he's doing in paragraph 10 is he's distinguishing Veda from Vedas with the S. Veda is any knowledge born of supersensuous perception. If I have a spiritual experience of something, that's part of the body of knowledge called the Veda, without the S at the end. The Vedas is the most complete scripture containing a record of all the world's greatest saints and sages and mystics who have realized Veda, without the S, which means all that whole vast body of supersensuous knowledge. Okay? That's the background we need. So see how technical the first part of this essay is? 1 through 15 is very technical, and then, or 1 to 14, and then it crescendos into this lovely, very powerful statement. Okay, so now we're back to 17 now. The shastra. So shastra here means the Veda, okay? Veda without the S. So not the books, the scriptures, but Veda, the whole body of supersensuous knowledge. The shastra, which is eternally existent and the instrument of the divine creator, preserver, and destroyer of the universe, reveals itself spontaneously in the hearts of rishis, purified of past impressions. In order to demonstrate this, and because such verification of the shastra will help in the revival, reestablishment, and spread of religion, God, who is the very embodiment of the Veda, has in this new incarnation almost completely neglected external forms of learning. There's a lot that's of interest here. First of all, he refers to the shastra as the instrument of the divine creator, preserver, and destroyer of the universe. This divine creator, preserver, and destroyer of the universe is a standard epithet for the personal God, right? But what does it mean that shastra is the instrument of God when he's creating? This goes back to, I think it was class 1. If not class 1, then class 2. I don't remember where we stopped in class 1. But it goes back to paragraph 5. So now we have to go back to paragraph 5. This is like, you have to read this like a textbook because Swamiji is constantly cross-referencing other parts of the same essay. So let's go to paragraph 5. The whole body of supersensuous knowledge, Gyan Rashi, having no beginning or end, and called by the name of Veda, is ever existent, and the Creator himself is creating, preserving, and destroying the universe with the help of this knowledge. This is what I think Swamiji is referring to in paragraph 17. But what does he mean? I already mentioned this briefly, I think, in that earlier class, but I'm going to repeat this if I haven't. We have to go understand something about traditional Vedanta here, okay? The traditional Vedantic schools, they were somewhat Vedic fundamentalists in a sense. They felt that the Vedas were the be-all and end-all. They considered non-Hindu religions beyond the pale, that kind of thing. And they went so far as to claim that this is literally Shankara's view. Shankara, the great philosopher of Advaita Vedanta. This is one scholar's characterization of Shankara's view. Vedic words occur in the mind of Prajapati. Prajapati is the creator god. When he is intent on creation. And corresponding to these Vedic words, he creates this universe. Literally, the words of the Vedas appear in the mind of God, and then God creates on the basis of those Vedas. Swamiji quite scathingly criticizes this view. Let me read to you something he says from a lecture. He says, he's criticizing what he calls the bigotry of Vedic fundamentalism. He says, such bigotry is characteristic of the orthodox element of all religions. For instance, the orthodox followers of the Vedas claim that the Vedas are the only authentic word of God in the world, that God has spoken to the world only through the Vedas. Not only that, but that the world itself exists by virtue of the Vedas. This is one form of that is Shankara's view. Then he continues, before the world was, the Vedas were. Everything in the world exists because it is in the Vedas. A cow exists because the name cow is in the Vedas. That is, because the animal we know as a cow is mentioned in the Vedas. The language of the Vedas is the original language of God. All other languages are mere dialects and not of God. So you see what Swami Vivekananda is criticizing here. He's criticizing the Vedic fundamentalism of some of these traditional Vedantins. And he's saying it's kind of silly to think that the Creator God, like these Vedic words have to pop into his head before he creates this world. But then you might ask, well, how does Swamiji understand creation? How do we understand the shastra being the instrument of the divine creator, preserver, and destroyer of the universe in paragraph 17? So I think there's another passage that gives us a clue. He says the following. The Vedas, this is not from this essay, it's from a different text. The Vedas are anadi, eternal. This is a standard doctrine across traditional Vedantic schools that the Vedas are beginningless. Anadi means literally beginningless. Okay. Swamiji says, I agree, but not in the sense, not in the literal sense. He says, the meaning of the statement is not, as is erroneously supposed by some, that the words of the Vedas are anadi, meaning beginningless, eternal, but that the spiritual laws inculcated by the Vedas are such. Do you catch the difference? Not the words themselves being eternal. The spiritual laws taught in the Vedas by means of those words are what's eternal. Then he says, these laws, these spiritual laws which are immutable and eternal, have been discovered at various times by great men or rishis, though some of them are forgotten now, while others are preserved. And he's saying the Vedas express spiritual laws. And the spiritual laws are eternal, and rishis come in different ages to directly realize these laws and then record them in what we have as the scriptures. Okay? So now, coming back to paragraph 17, when Swami Vivekananda is referring to the shastra as eternally existent, so remember, this is like anadi, beginningless, eternal, and the instrument of the divine creator, preserver, and destroyer of the universe, he's not claiming that the Vedas, the 4 books, the 4 scriptures, that's not the Shastra. He's talking about spiritual laws, or that whole body of supersensuous knowledge, which he calls Veda, V-E-D-A. That is the instrument. Those spiritual laws are the instrument by which God creates, preserves, and destroys this world. That's what he means. So it takes a lot of kind of going back and forth, cross-referencing, and quite a bit of understanding of traditional Vedanta to even understand, I think, what he's saying here. Then it gets even more interesting in the next sentence. In order to demonstrate this, and because such verification of the Shastra will help in the revival, reestablishment, and spread of religion, God, who is the very embodiment of the Veda, has in this new incarnation almost completely neglected external forms of learning. Swamiji raises a very interesting question here, which I think many of us don't even ask. Why did God, this time around, choose to incarnate as a poor villager who chose to drop out of school at age 6? Because he could have been the most learned person in the world in the history of humanity. Yeah, go ahead.
So I've been trying to figure out what they say Ramakrishna was unlettered. Does unlettered just mean that he didn't have a degree with a MS or a BS or whatever those kind of letters are? Or does it mean, because I at first thought it meant he didn't know how to read, but then I've been reading he was a great reader. He used to read to the villagers. So I'm just confused by what does that mean, unlettered? Okay.
The word illiterate means you can't read.
Right.
And Swami Vivekananda himself made the mistake once of calling Sri Ramakrishna illiterate, but that's not true. He was prone to exaggeration sometimes, and so Sri Ramakrishna was in fact not illiterate. But the word you are asking about is unlettered, and I think the best way to define that would be just uneducated, I think. It doesn't even mean that you don't have higher degrees, but I would say that it just means uneducated. And it's true that he dropped out of formal schooling by age 6. He found it distasteful. He said, I don't want a mere breadwinning education. But, and this is something that people, I think, underestimate or that they overlook. He kept a bunch of books with him. One was the Bible. One was Ashtavakra Samhita. Another one is a compilation in Bengali called Muktiotaha Shadhan, liberation and the various spiritual practices leading to liberation. And the compilation is by Bipin Bihari Ghoshal. And he would have people read out from these books to him and many others. And great pundits would come. Vaishnava pundits, tantric pundits, talk about scriptures with him. And he had an eidetic memory, photographic memory. He could remember everything he would listen to. That's why in the gospel you'll find him quoting from the Bhagavad Gita, quoting from the Bhagavata and other texts. So I think he was actually highly learned, in spite of not being formally educated beyond the age of 6. And he was definitely not illiterate. And in fact, in Bilimat, I was fortunate enough to have seen his original handwriting. It's preserved in the second or third floor of Bilimat. It's only taken out on special occasions, once per year. And you see how he copied onto paper whole verses from text in beautiful handwriting. Okay. Nonetheless, Swamiji raises this question. Even if we take into account all of that he was an extremely intelligent person, learned in a certain sense, even if he was not formally educated, why did God choose not to be formally educated in this incarnation? That's the question. And Swamiji gives an answer. What he's saying is, so again, you have to kind of keep in mind all the previous paragraphs. Every paragraph builds on the previous paragraph. It's a very logically developed argument that he's making here. So remember that the key to understanding Veda is he begins by saying Veda means the whole body of supersensuous knowledge. Then he gradually introduces the concept of the idea of the Vedas with an S, which refers to the 4 books, Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, right? That is the most complete expression of that supersensuous body of knowledge. And he's playing on the word shastra here in the same way. The word shastra has these 2 different connotations or 2 dimensions. On the one hand, it means Veda, the body of supersensuous truths, okay? And it's in that sense that God creates this world, preserves this world, and destroys this world by means of these spiritual laws, supersensuous truths. But when it comes to answering this question, why was Sri Ramakrishna not formally educated? I think what Swamiji is doing is he's toggling from this Veda to Vedas. And he understands Shastra in the sense of Vedas. And he's saying, look, God could have been incarnated as a great Pandit. Chaitanya is a good example of somebody, a previous incarnation, who was one of the greatest Pandits in the world and knew the scriptures inside and out. He later kind of renounced his scholarship and taught taking the name of Hari as the highest and all that. But he was a great scholar, actually, of Nyaya, which is the toughest of all the Indian philosophies. It's like hardcore, super technical. So Chaitanya had mastered Nyaya, putting to shame the other great Nyaya Pandits throughout India. So Sri Ramakrishna could have done that. But instead, he chose not to. Why? Yeah, please. Can you give Lisa the mic?
Well, it's the pundits that are arguing. It's the pundits that are going through these sectarian arguments and making the division between what is higher, lower, more pure knowledge, what is more momentarily concerning knowledge. I mean, that's the problem, is that they are holding such lettered descriptions of what it's supposed to.
Right. I think I see what you're saying. You're saying that people with a lot of learning are part of the problem in a way. And that part of the reason for all the sectarian fighting and disputes, conflicts, are because, no, I'm greater than you, I know more than you, I know the scriptures better than you do. And so maybe Sri Ramakrishna, this is nice actually. I think that is maybe one reason why Sri Ramakrishna, God this time chose not to be formally educated, because, and he would often say, sometimes pundits are like these vultures soaring high in the sky, but with their sights set on the carrion beneath. right? Very worldly thoughts, but high thinking. But ultimately, where does that lead you? So, building on that, he was not formally educated, but he realized the spiritual truths taught in all these scriptures, especially the Vedas, but also in the other scriptures. Through his intense spiritual practices, through his sincerity, and through his intense longing, vyakulata, the Bengali word is bakulata, intense longing for God. And so, if we were to play on this, on the dual meaning of Veda here, we can say that Sri Ramakrishna realized Veda, V-E-D-A, meaning the whole body of supersensuous knowledge. He realized it directly, and thereby verified the truth of the Vedas, with the S, which means the truth of the 4 scriptures that we know in Hinduism, the foundation of Hinduism. He demonstrated the truth of the Vedas through his spiritual experiences. That was the idea. Without the need for any of this formal learning and punditry, which, as Lisa's pointing out, has often been the cause of sectarianism and one-sidedness. Okay, and 18. I'll read it one more time. It is well established in the Smritis, etc., that God incarnates again and again in human form in order to protect the Veda, or true religion, and Brahmanhood. That is, the ability to teach true religion. And here again, some people's hackles might be raised by the moment they see the word Brahmanhood. What is Brahmanhood? Why is he talking about Brahmins? Okay, so let me read the Bengali here. Ved, অর্থাৎ প্রকৃত ধর্মের এবং ব্রাহ্মণত্ব, Brahmanatva is the Sanskrit term, which is the same in Bengali, Brahmanatva. অর্থাৎ ধর্ম শিক্ষকত্বের রক্ষার জন্য ভগবান বারংবার শরীর ধারণ করেন, ইহা স্মৃতাদিতে প্রসিদ্ধ আছে. Okay. What does he mean by Brahmanhood here? And anyone who came to the previous class or watched it online, this will give useful context, actually, because I talked at length about Swami Vivekananda's views on the caste system. But what do you think he means by Brahmanhood here in paragraph 18? Can you give the mic to Lisa? Thanks.
Well, it kind of explained it. It's the most purest form of the use of the word. So describing it, of course, that Brahmins are considered a higher caste, but they are also the ones that actually had the time to study the religion, to truly become teachers of the religion. So, I mean...
Yeah, the true teachers of religion, but the key here is he does not define Brahmins in terms of heredity. He doesn't say that you have to be born into a Brahmin family. That's not what he's saying. And we talked about this at length in the last class, so I'm not going to go into it in detail, but what he said instead was, or is, he goes back to the Bhagavad Gita. And in the Gita, you find the caste system, Varna, defined in terms of 2 terms, guna and karma. Guna means one's innate qualities, and karma means one's behavior, what one does, how one behaves. And so Swami Vivekananda says, your caste is determined by these 2 things, your innate qualities and your external behavior. Neither of those things has anything to do with heredity. So in the same way, Brahmanhood here is defined in terms of anyone as a Brahmin who's a true teacher of religion. How can you be a true teacher of religion? If you embody religion yourself, if you practice what you preach. That's the idea. Which means you should exhibit all of the great qualities of genuinely spiritual people. Humility, compassion, spirituality, devotion, detachment, and things like that. Do you see what I mean? So that's also very important to keep in mind. So he doesn't explicitly talk about the caste system anywhere in this essay, but you see how this one word, to appreciate how Swamiji understands the word Brahmanhood, I think it really helps to bring in a lot of other places where he talks about the caste system explicitly. And if anyone is just beginning to watch our classes with this part 4, I suggest you go to class 3, where I quote from many of the places where Swami Vivekananda talks about the caste system. Not in terms of heredity, but in terms of what he considered to be the original caste system based on guna and karma, innate qualities and our behavior. Okay. Okay. What we can do is pause for questions now. Any questions? And yes, Hannah. Sorry, what is it? Hold on, I know your name.
Vijaya.
Vijaya, yeah.
Thank you. Do you think his prediction has come to pass? Do you feel that India actually did have that great upswell after?
We're in the middle of it. So the thing is, Swami Vivekananda...
What's the timeline here?
The timeline is, Swami Vivekananda gave several timelines, but one of them is 1400 years.
Uh-oh.
He said that Vilamat will be a great... this will be the epicenter of spirituality emanating throughout the world, and its spiritual impact will last 1400 years. And then there's some variations on that. Other people will say 12, that they heard him say 1200 or so. So anyway, 1400 is one of the figures that we have recorded. So the point is, we're still babies as a tradition, to be honest, and that's important to keep in mind. Sri Ramakrishna left his body in 1886. The order started, a little over a decade after that. It's just been 120, 30 years. Think about Christianity in 120 CE, Common Era. Nothing, there were just a few stray renegade Christians here and there, but nothing was codified yet. There was no set fixed theology. So we're at the beginning of this tradition. So this upswell that you're asking about, Swami Vivekananda talks about it at the very, I think second to last paragraph, right? When he says, look at 29. Imagine the complete manifestation of that power, the very first appearance of which has roused distant echoes from all across the world. That was late 1901. He's saying the very first appearance of the advent of Sri Ramakrishna, the Ramakrishna incarnation and his power. But we haven't seen the full impact yet, and it's going to take more centuries before we do. We might not be alive. Yeah. Any other questions? And I imagine there may be some online questions. Let me just see whether... Okay, streamed 2 months ago. That's not the one. Streamed 2 months ago. There we go. Okay. Chirag is asking, why is brahmacharya necessary for spiritual progress? Okay, so that has... it's not completely irrelevant, but it's not directly related. Let me first... Okay, yeah, both these questions are actually not really related to the text. Okay, so does anyone have questions related to this text first? Yeah, please. Please tell me your name and please give him the mic.
Hi, Swamiji. My name's Suresh. And I had a question about the thing I've heard about recently about not using the term Hinduism is that the British use that term, or like they coined that term, so we shouldn't be using. That's one criticism I heard of it.
Yeah.
And going back also to growing up in the U.S. too, my dad was Hindu, and the reason why, there was kind of that embarrassment about talking about it is, it was some of it was the caste system thing, and another part of that was you had to explain to people, no, we don't worship 1,000 gods,
Yeah.
And like you described, it's just a manifestation of one.
Yeah, these are both great points. And so the first point you raise is that it's true that the term Hinduism it's not indigenous to India. It comes from India's colonizers. That's true. But think about the word queer as an example. It was considered an insult, right, to homosexuals. But what if many people that group has itself appropriated the term and embraced it and given it a positive connotation. And I think that's what Swami Vivekananda was doing in the late 19th century. He's taking a term knowing full well that it was a term coined by by his colonizers. And he says, you know what, we're going to make it our own and defend it in the face of the British who are trying to oppress us and suppress us. So I think the same thing can be done, and I think that the danger is throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Any real Hindu will know that Hinduism is not about the caste system and not about, a million different gods, some kind of polytheism and this and that, right? It's a crude caricature of what Hinduism really is. So what Swami Vivekananda was trying to do is correct our understanding of what Hinduism is, but without abandoning the term. And I think, now you might ask, well, why? Why didn't he popularize the term Sanatana Dharma? He did use the word Sanatana Dharma on a number of occasions, but his main term was Hinduism. And he equated Hinduism with Sanatana Dharma. But why did he stick to the term? Why do you think? I mean, any speculations about why? He didn't have to.
Well, originally he was speaking a lot to English-speaking group of people, Westerners, Americans and British people. He did a lot of...
That's true. So he did a lot of preaching in the West, and so in the West, of course, saying Sanatana Dharma will be gibberish to them. So maybe that's part of it. But the thing is, notice, this essay was not written for Westerners. It was written for Indians, written originally in Bengali. And he could have asked, what is Sanatana Dharma, like the UCLA student wanted me to give a talk on. But no, he wrote, what is Hindu Dharma? Every word is important in this document. I mean, he wrote this like a scientific textbook. Very, very carefully chosen words. I personally feel that, and of course it's a personal thing, but I think that because, see, the thing is, among the world religions, the world religions that are known, right, the major ones, the ones that are most popular, there's the Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, there's Taoism, who knows Sanatana Dharma, right? They know Hinduism. It's a term that's already accepted and known to describe the religion of the Indian subcontinent and the majority of the inhabitants, right? So why reinvent the wheel? Why not just define Hinduism itself more expansively, more generously, more accurately? But anyway, I mean, obviously the choice is yours. But I do feel that if we shy away too much from calling ourselves Hindu, then Hinduism itself may die as a religion.
So before the term Hinduism became popular, would Indian people say Sanatana Dharma was a collective word or for describing their...
It's a good question.
Or was there
written on this? If you're interested, it's called Unifying Hinduism, written by a scholar named Andrew Nicholson. He's a friend of mine. And in the book, he's trying to avoid two extremes. One is that Hinduism has been there all along. And the other extreme is that it's this completely artificial modern construct and that there is no such thing as Hinduism. And he kind of steers this middle course between these two positions. And he says that in spite of the fact that the term Hinduism was coined relatively late in India's history, nonetheless, you can find a kind of underlying unity across the different traditions, the spiritual traditions and religious traditions you find on the Indian subcontinent. And so it's not wildly misleading to talk about Hinduism as this overarching religion that encompasses all the different spiritual and religious traditions we find on India's soil. So I find that position plausible. The idea is that, especially if you go back to the original scriptures like Rig Veda, Bhagavad Gita, you don't get the sense of sectarianism, that these scriptures are written from the standpoint of one tradition within this broader Hindu religion. You get the sense that the scriptures themselves are very self-consciously teaching this very vast religion that encompasses many different spiritual attitudes, many different spiritual paths, many different sects. And so I think that's the power of the term Hinduism. The idea is that it's just so vast. You meet 5 Hindu families, each one of them is worshiping a different form of God. And one might be a jnani, and one might be a bhakta, one might be a karma yogi. This is very unusual. I don't think there's any other religion in the world that has that much diversity under its umbrella. And that's part of the beauty and uniqueness of Hinduism. Let me check whether online they've found any questions that are more directly relevant. Okay, so there we go. Tripti is asking a question that is relevant. What is the distinction between Veda and Vedas that you are stipulating? Do you mean to say that God only makes a small portion known to humanity through scriptures out of his infinite knowledge? That's part of what I'm saying. That's a nice way of putting it, actually. So Veda is the entire body of supersensuous knowledge. And I think it's reasonable to say that no single human being can have a monopoly on the whole body of supersensuous knowledge. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, he was fond of the example of an ant, which goes to a hill of sugar, and with great difficulty takes 1 grain of that sugar, and then gets puffed up with pride and says, next time I go back, I'll take the whole hill of sugar with me. And Sri Ramakrishna says, God is infinite. And even if some people claim to know the whole of God, God is just this and no more, Sri Ramakrishna says, you can never actually put a limit to God. You can never say God is just this and no more. And so every scripture is, in a certain sense, finite. I mean, it's going to teach God more or less expansively, but no scripture can capture the infinitude of God. Just as no human being can realize the infinitude of God, the whole of God. And you might say, well, what about Sri Ramakrishna's metaphors of the blind man and the elephant, where there's one person who can see the whole elephant? What about the chameleon parable, where there's one person who sees the chameleon in different colors? So that's where I think we have to be careful. Both of these analogies are used in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna many times. I think it would be a mistake to think that Sri Ramakrishna is saying that there is a person who has realized the whole of God. And lo and behold, that person is me, Sri Ramakrishna. No, but I think that in both these parables, the blind man and the elephant and the chameleon, the person who can see the whole elephant and the person sitting under the tree who sees the chameleon in different colors is the Vijnani. So Sri Ramakrishna was a Vijnani, so it is Sri Ramakrishna, except with this caveat, that even the Vijnani does not realize the whole, the complete, infinite God. Nonetheless, the Vijnani has a more expansive knowledge of God, a more expansive realization of the divine than even other realized souls. So we're not talking about comparing the Vijnani with ignorant people. Even with people who have realized God, as Sri Aurobindo put it, he says, while others realize God in a single or limited aspect, Sri Ramakrishna realized God in his illimitable unity as a sum of an illimitable variety. That's the idea. The Vijnani has experienced God in multiple forms, multiple aspects. And for that reason, the Vedas, according to Swami Vivekananda, the scriptures known as the Vedas, are a more complete expression of that body of supersensuous truths known as the Veda, V-E-D-A, than any other religious scripture. But he was not a Vedic fundamentalist, so he's not saying that it has a monopoly on the truth, and that so that's the other extreme that we should try to avoid. Yeah. Can you give the mic to, again, I keep wanting to say Hannah, but
When you say Vedas is the most has the most complete is the most complete reflection of that Veda, isn't that still saying like this is subtly kind of the best and the others are lower?
That's a great question.
But I did have a thought that maybe earlier there's a way that isn't the case, and I think that would be that it contains the largest proportion of content that is not related to political, secular, ritualistic, like Maya matters.
Oh, I see. So it has less of the Maya stuff. Well, it's got plenty of the worldly stuff too, if you look carefully enough at the Vedas. So I don't think it's necessarily, but go ahead. Keep the mic closer to your mouth, though.
Continue with what you're saying.
No, I don't think it's that. I think what he's saying is, so this is Jeffrey Long. He's actually a devotee in our tradition. He's a disciple of Tyaganandaji, the head of our Boston Center. He wrote an article on this issue, on Swamiji's statement about the Vedas as being the most complete expression. And he's saying, look, you still find a certain kind of higher and lower thing going on here. And what I argue in my work is that he distinguishes. We have to distinguish two different things. Okay, one is doctrinal truth, we can say, or understanding of God on the one hand, and what philosophers call salvific efficacy on the other, effectiveness in leading to salvation on the other. And so if we separate these two things, keep these apart, what I think Swami Vivekananda is saying is that if you compare the Vedas to the other world-related scriptures like the Bible, what you find in these other scriptures is all sorts of wonderful teachings about spirituality, about the nature of God. But what you also find in many of these scriptures is a certain one-sidedness. And descriptions of God that are either narrow or God is only this and not Allahu Akbar, like that. God is Allah alone and none else, these kinds of statements. Sri Ramakrishna himself points out the Vaishnava scriptures will tend to be sectarian and say that Krishna is the highest, Krishna is the greatest. Others are okay, but they're kind of his servants or whatever, or portions of him. The Vedas don't do that. And the Vedas are equally happy praising Krishna in one moment. And actually, that's not quite accurate because the Vedas don't talk about Krishna. Bhagavata Purana does. So it's not quite like that. But for instance, the great statement from Rig Veda, Ekam sad vipra bahuda vadanti. The divine truth is one. The infinite divine is one. But sages call it by various names. That's an example of the expansiveness of the Vedas that I think Swamiji is thinking of when he's saying that the Vedas are in a certain sense broader, wider than the other world-related scriptures. Because if you take that statement, you can see how the Vedas will be happy to accept God as Christ, will be happy to accept God as Allah, will be happy to accept God as non-dual Brahman, right? Without going into this higher, lower stuff. And so it has a wider, more expansive understanding of the divine reality. But at the same time, he never says that the Vedas somehow, if you have faith in the Vedas as opposed to other world-related scriptures, that you're in a better position from the standpoint of salvation, that somehow you're better equipped to reach the goal more quickly. That's what I mean by salvific efficacy. That's what philosophers mean by So he never says that believing in the Vedas will set you on the spiritual fast track to liberation or to salvation. Because that really would become a certain kind of Vedic fundamentalism, but I don't think he does that. I think all he's saying is, if you look at the Vedas and the Bhagavad Gita especially, because he considered the Gita to be the kind of a distillation of the Vedas, what you find again and again is a really expansive conception of the divine that encompasses the different forms of the divine we find in the other world-related scriptures. Okay, thank you so much. It's about time to wrap up. Any final question? Okay, thank you, everyone. Oh, our next class, Thursday, October 26th, our fifth and final class. We'll wrap it up. All right, thank you so much for joining me in this exciting journey. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.